Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling something that's been on everyone's minds these days,
hmm
the big stuff. You know, those social and emotional and behavioral challenges schools are facing.
Yeah, for sure.
And luckily, you sent over some really fascinating stuff, a recent national survey of school leaders, and some in-depth analysis of the findings by Dr. Howie Knoff. Now, he's a school psychologist with over 40 years of experience, so he knows a thing or two about this. And what I'm really excited about is that we're not just going to be looking at statistics. We're going way beyond the headlines to see what these challenges actually mean for our classrooms.
Right, right.
And I think we're going to uncover some really surprising connections along the way.
Yeah, definitely. The context behind these numbers is so important, if we really want to figure out what works to actually address these issues.
Absolutely. So let's dive right into these numbers. This National Center for Education Statistics survey found that almost 20% of students just aren't doing individual work. And 1 in 5 are showing up academically unprepared. And if those numbers weren't concerning enough, get this. For many schools, weekly threats of fights in the hallways are just a normal part of life.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this data was gathered, not that long after the pandemic, which undeniably has left its mark on students.
Right.
In fact, over 80% of these school leaders who were surveyed think that the pandemic is still negatively impacting students' social and emotional development.
It's like we're seeing these aftershocks. Things seem like they're getting back to normal, but underneath it all, there are these long-term impacts. And we're only just now starting to understand them.
Precisely. And that's actually where Dr. Knopf's insights are so valuable. He cautions against what he calls intervention roulette, which is this tendency to just jump into solutions without actually taking the time to understand why a student is behaving the way they are.
So, like throwing a dart at a dartboard blindfolded.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Knopf saying this approach, it can really backfire. Like instead of helping, it might make a student even more, resistant to future interventions.
And we're not talking about fixing a leaky faucet here. This is about shaping young lives.
Right. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on it and hope it goes away. It's about digging deeper.
Exactly. And he really hits home this point that students, they don't just magically mature out of inappropriate behavior. They need to be taught just as intentionally as we teach them things like math or reading.
Right. We must shift our focus from just reacting to these issues to preventing them. Imagine if we, taught social, emotional, and behavioral skills with the same kind of rigor as we teach math.
So instead of viewing these skills as secondary or something that kids will, just pick up on their own, we're making them a core part of education.
Exactly. It's about empowerment, not coddling. And Dr. Knopf makes this really interesting comparison to teaching literacy.
Teaching social emotional skills is like teaching literacy. How so?
Well, think about it. We wouldn't just expect a child to, just become fluent in reading overnight. It takes focused instruction, tons of practice, and consistent reinforcement. And social emotional skills are no different. We need to break them down into teachable components.
Like we do with reading, right?
Exactly. Just like phonics and fluency for reading, we need to explicitly teach things like conflict resolution or emotional regulation and respectful communication, like step by step.
So it's like we're giving students a toolbox filled with all the skills they need to navigate those tricky social and emotional situations.
Yes. And these skills go way beyond the classroom. These are life skills, things that they can take with them after they graduate and that will help them in their relationships and careers and just in their lives in general.
But I bet our listeners are wondering how all of this translates to the real world. Like, what does it look like in practice?
Well, let's say you're a teacher and you're dealing with a conflict in your classroom. Instead of just telling students, work it out, you can actually give them a structure, like a process. So first they can identify the problem, then they brainstorm solutions together, and then they reach a compromise. And this can all be practiced through role-playing and simulations, and by applying these skills to, real-life examples in the classroom.
Wow, so it's like we're giving them an actual roadmap for navigating those really tough conversations.
Yeah, and it goes way beyond classroom management. Like we're talking about equipping students with these essential skills that will benefit their relationships, their careers, their overall well-being. It's laying the groundwork for their future success and not just academic success either.
That's amazing. But what about our listeners, who might not be teachers? What can they do to support this shift to proactive social emotional learning, whether they're a parent or maybe even just a community member?
Well, First, it's understanding that this isn't just the school's responsibility, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone's responsibility. Like parents, they play a huge role in reinforcing these skills at home,
Right. How so?
just by talking to their kids about their feelings and modeling respectful communication themselves, creating an environment where their kids feel comfortable sharing their struggles.
And what about teachers? Where can they go to find resources that will help them with all this?
There are some fantastic organizations out there, like KCEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They have tons of evidence-based SEL curricula and professional development specifically for educators.
Great. And what about people who aren't directly involved in education, like just regular community members? What can they do?
I think that's where collective action comes in. Talking to your school board members,
Okay.
attending those school board meetings, making your voice heard, letting them know that you believe that this stuff is essential for our students and for our communities, and that you want them to invest in it.
So we all have a role to play in making sure that our kids have that supportive and nurturing environment they need.
Absolutely, we all do.
Okay, so this NCES survey also highlights some pretty alarming behavioral trends that schools are grappling with, things like verbal abuse toward teachers and cyberbullying. Sadly, even weapons being brought to school. It found that almost 20% of schools are seeing threats of fights between students every single week. And 17% say verbal abuse of teachers happens at least once a week.
Hmm.
That paints a pretty sobering picture, of just the stress levels that everyone's facing right now.
It does. And it really highlights the fact that we need a more holistic way of looking at this problem, like relying on punitive measures like suspensions or expulsions. That's not going to solve the problem. It doesn't get to the root of it.
And that takes us back to what Dr. Knoff was saying about understanding the why behind a student's behavior.
Right.
It's not enough to just label a kid as disruptive without trying to understand what's driving that behavior.
Exactly. He calls it a data-based problem-solving process, where educators look at the data, analyze the patterns, and delve into the context of a student's life before making any kind of assumptions about why they're acting that way.
So it's like being a detective, right? You have to look for clues. Instead of seeing a child acting out and thinking, what's wrong with this kid, we need to be asking, what happened to this child? What's going on in their life? Are they struggling at home? Are they being bullied? Are they having trouble keeping up in school? There are so many different possibilities.
So many, yeah. Until we understand that root cause, any interventions we try are probably going to miss the mark.
Just like fixing that leaky faucet without knowing where the leak is coming from, you could end up tightening all the wrong pipes.
You've got it. And that's where Dr. Knopf's expertise is so valuable. He's spent, decades working with these students, and he's got these really insightful strategies that focus on teaching, giving students the skills they need instead of just punishing them when they make mistakes.
So it's not about being soft on kids. It's about empowering them.
Exactly. It's about giving them the tools to make better choices.
Okay, but if this approach is so great, why aren't we seeing it in more schools?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, there's this misconception that teaching social emotional skills is going to take away from time spent on academics. But, as we've been discussing, these skills are actually the foundation for academic success.
It's like building a house on a shaky foundation. No matter how fancy the house is, if the foundation's weak, it's all going to fall apart eventually.
Exactly. Social emotional learning, that's the foundation. Without it, students are more likely to struggle academically, socially, emotionally.
So it's not about choosing one over the other. It's about recognizing that they're both important, right?
They're intertwined. They actually reinforce one another.
Makes sense.
And then there's the issue of resources.
Of course, yeah.
A lot of schools are already strapped, limited budgets, not enough staff. They might not have the capacity to implement these kinds of comprehensive programs.
It's a real challenge. But it comes down to priorities, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
If we really believe that social emotional learning is crucial, then we need to be willing to make it a priority. And that means putting our money where our mouth is.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where advocacy comes in. We need to speak up, urge our schools and policymakers to prioritize this.
So it's not just about funding. It's about creating a culture where these skills are truly valued, like part of the fabric of the school.
Ingrained in the culture. From how teachers interact with students to how they handle conflicts, the overall feel of the school environment.
So it's a philosophy, not just a program.
Exactly.
Creating a school where everyone feels safe, supported, and respected, that's where kids can really thrive.
I agree.
So for our listeners out there, who are thinking, what can I do? What's a good takeaway for parents, teachers, Anyone really who wants to help make this shift happen.
I think we all need to examine our own beliefs about behavior. Like when you see a child acting out, do you think, oh, they're being disrespectful or defiant? Or do you try to see it as a form of communication?
Ooh, that's interesting.
Maybe this is how they're expressing some unmet need or some kind of struggle that they're going through.
So we need to shift from judgment to curiosity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of, what's wrong with this child? We need to be asking, what happened to this child?
To really try to see the world through their eyes.
And be willing to challenge our own biases, We all have them.
Yeah.
But we need to be aware of them and make sure that they're not influencing our interactions.
So approach each child with an open mind and a belief in their potential.
Exactly. Every single child, no matter their background, no matter their behavior, deserves to be treated with respect, with dignity, with compassion. And when we approach them from that place, well, then we can create the conditions for real growth, real transformation.
That's powerful. But what about those students who are really struggling? Like those who are displaying dangerous or really disruptive behavior?
That's where Dr. Knoff's concept of intervention roulette is so important. We can't just keep trying random things and hoping for the best.
Right.
We have to be strategic, intentional.
So what would that look like in a real classroom? What steps can educators take?
It all starts with a really thorough assessment. Gather data from multiple sources, the student themselves, their parents, their teachers, anyone who's involved in their care. Try to get a good understanding of their strengths, their challenges, what their triggers are, and their goals.
So it's like we're creating a complete picture of the student, taking everything into account.
Exactly. And then we use that data to try to find that root cause. What's really driving this behavior? Is it a lack of social skills? Do they have trouble regulating their emotions? Could there be trauma involved? Or maybe some unmet need? Once we understand that root cause, then we can start to develop a targeted intervention plan.
And that plan is going to look different for each student.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
What works for one student might not work for another.
Yeah.
We have to be flexible, adaptable, and we need to be constantly monitoring their progress, making adjustments as needed.
I bet that individualized approach is really effective. But it sounds like it takes a lot of time and effort.
It does, and expertise. And unfortunately, a lot of schools just don't have the resources to support every single student who needs it.
Right, yeah. And it's a harsh reality, and it really speaks to the need for systemic change.
Right.
We can't just keep expecting our schools to do more with less. We need to invest in our children's well-being and provide the resources they need to create those supportive learning environments for every student.
I couldn't agree more.
It's about shifting our priorities. Investing in social emotional learning. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And it's an investment that's going to pay off for generations to come.
Well said.
Now, we've talked about the role of schools, but I'm curious about parents and families. How can they support their kids' social, emotional, and behavioral development?
Parents are essential in this work. They're the experts on their own children, right? They have that unique understanding of their needs and their strengths and their challenges.
So it's about creating a partnership between the parents and the educators, working together.
Precisely.
Right.
Open communication is key. Parents need to feel like they can talk to their child's teachers, share their concerns, and teachers need to be willing to listen and collaborate.
So it's not just about addressing problems. It's also about celebrating successes, right?
Yeah.
And reinforcing the positive things, too.
Absolutely.
Creating that supportive environment at home where kids feel safe to express their emotions, make mistakes, learn from their experiences.
Exactly. It's about setting clear expectations, having boundaries, providing consistent consequences, both for good behavior and for, not so good behavior.
Finding that balance, right?
Right. Balance between support and structure. So kids feel both loved and challenged.
Right.
And every kid is different. So we have to be flexible and really try to be responsive to each kid's unique needs and their temperament. And we have to be patient. This stuff, it takes time, developing these skills. It's a lifelong journey. There are going to be bumps along the way. But with consistent support and guidance, kids can learn to navigate these challenges with resilience and grace.
That's great. But what about those parents who might be, struggling themselves? What if they're dealing with their own emotional issues or behavioral issues? How can they be expected to support their children when they might be feeling overwhelmed themselves?
That is such an important point, and it often gets overlooked. Parents aren't superhuman,
Right.
They need support too.
Absolutely.
And that support might come from family or friends, or maybe even therapy. There's no shame in asking for help. In fact, it takes strength and self-awareness to ask for help. And when parents take care of their own well-being, well, then they can be better equipped to take care of their children.
Absolutely. It takes a village. And parents shouldn't hesitate to reach out and ask for help when they need it. But what about those kids who might be falling through the cracks? The ones who aren't getting the support they need at home or at school? What can we do to reach them?
Well, that's where our communities come in. There are all these amazing organizations out there that are dedicated to supporting children and families. They offer after-school programs, mental health services, mentorship opportunities.
So we need to make sure every child has access to those resources, no matter their circumstances.
Exactly. It really does take a village to raise a child, and we all have to work together to create a community where every child feels seen and heard and supported.
Something Dr. Knoff has said really stuck with me. He said, every time you do an intervention with a student and it doesn't work, you make that student more resistant to the next intervention.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
It's really about being thoughtful and intentional. When we just jump into solutions without really understanding the behavior, well, we're wasting time and resources. And we can actually end up damaging the student's self-esteem and their trust in us.
It's like if they're always being punished or corrected without being given the tools and the support they need to succeed, they might start to feel hopeless.
Right, like they're incapable of change, that they're just like bad kids.
Exactly. And that can lead to more negative behaviors and problems in school. It becomes a vicious cycle.
It does, and it makes it so much harder for them to break free from that cycle and reach their potential.
So what's the alternative? How do we do interventions in a way that really empowers them?
We have to remember, behavior is communication. When a child acts out, they're trying to tell us something. Maybe they can't put it into words, but they're communicating through their actions. So instead of just reacting to the behavior, we need to try to figure out what they're trying to say. What are they struggling with? What do they need?
So once we understand the why, then we can start to figure out how to address it.
Right. It should be a collaborative effort, too. Involve the student, their parents, their teachers, any professionals who are working with them. And the plan needs to be flexible, constantly evolving as the child's needs change. It's not about finding that one magic solution. It's about creating an ongoing process.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And there are going to be setbacks along the way, times when things aren't working as well as we hoped.
Yeah, of course.
But those setbacks, they're not failures. They're just opportunities to learn and grow.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah.
And we have to believe that change is possible.
I couldn't agree more. Every child has the potential.
I really love Dr. Knopf's analogy about social-emotional learning being similar to teaching literacy. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. Just like reading and writing, social emotional skills don't just magically appear.
Right.
We have to teach them. We have to practice them.
It's a process.
It is. And we can't assume that kids are just going to pick these things up on their own. We need to break these complex skills down into, smaller, more manageable steps. Give them lots of chances to practice in a safe environment.
It makes me think about how we teach reading. Like, we wouldn't just hand a child the book and expect them to learn.
Right. Exactly. They need guidance. They need instruction. We have to be intentional and systematic about it. And the sooner we start, the better. Just like with literacy, early intervention is key.
So social emotional learning, it should be a core part of our homes and our schools. It should be built into the culture.
Exactly. And it's not just something nice to have. It's fundamental. It's essential for their success in school, in relationships, in life in general.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Me too.
But I bet our listeners are wondering, what can I do? So what are some practical tips for parents and educators, things they can do right away to support a child's social-emotional development?
Well, the first thing is to create a safe and supportive environment, a place where kids feel comfortable opening up, expressing their emotions, asking for help when they need it.
So being a good listener.
Yes. And validating their feelings, not judging or criticizing.
Making them feel heard.
Exactly. Seen, heard, and understood. And, we have to model those healthy behaviors ourselves, right? Kids are always watching us. So we need to walk the walk.
Right. Be the change we want to see.
Right. And we can teach them specific skills, like how to name their feelings, manage their emotions, resolve conflicts peacefully, and build healthy relationships. And we can do this through, role-playing or games or books or even just real-life experiences.
That's great.
Make it fun. Kids learn best when they're enjoying themselves.
So it's about making social-emotional learning a part of everyday life.
Exactly. And be patient. Remember, it's a journey.
It is.
It takes time to develop these skills. There will be bumps along the way, but with consistent support, kids can learn to handle anything life throws at them.
We've talked a lot about the challenges schools are facing, but what about the things they're doing well? What are some of the strengths you're seeing in schools that are supporting student well-being?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm actually really happy to say that there are many schools doing some incredible things.
That's great to hear.
Like implementing those universal social emotional learning programs we were talking about, creating a positive school climate, providing targeted support for students who need a little extra help, and they're partnering with families, training staff.
That's so encouraging. It's great to see schools prioritizing student well-being.
It is. And it's so important to celebrate those successes, share those best practices. We can all learn from each other.
We've covered the benefits of social-emotional learning, but how can technology play a role? Can it be helpful in supporting this?
Technology, well, it's a powerful tool, that's for sure, but it can be a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, it can provide information, connect students with mentors and their peers. It can be a platform for like virtual collaboration and learning. But on the other hand, it can also be distracting and it can lead to isolation, even cyberbullying. So we have to use technology thoughtfully, teach kids how to use it responsibly.
So it's about finding that balance, using technology in a way that's beneficial, and teaching kids those digital citizenship skills.
Exactly. Technology itself is just a tool. It can be used for good or bad. It's really up to us to make sure it's being used in a way that supports students and helps them grow.
So true. Now, we focused a lot on the positive aspects of all of this, but are there any potential downsides? Anything we should be cautious about?
That's an important question, and the answer is yeah, there are a few concerns that have been raised, even though the benefits are really well documented.
It's not a perfect solution.
Right. Like, one concern is that some of these SEL programs could be used to, promote specific values or beliefs that might not be shared by everyone.
Right, yeah.
It's crucial that these programs are culturally sensitive, that they're respectful of the diversity of values and beliefs in our society.
And we don't want them to stifle critical thinking.
No. Definitely not. We want kids to think for themselves.
Develop their own voices.
Exactly. There's also concern that SEL could be used to, pathologize normal childhood behavior, labeling kids as deficient or disordered when they're just going through normal developmental stuff.
That's a great point.
It's important to use these programs to support healthy development, not to, stigmatize or label children.
Finding that balance between providing support and recognizing that each child is an individual.
You got it.
Now, we've talked a lot about schools and families, but what about the broader community? What role do they play in all of this? How can they help to create environments that support social emotional well-being for kids?
That's a great question, and I think it's one we need to be asking ourselves more and more these days.
Yeah.
Our communities play a huge role in how kids develop, so we need to be deliberate about creating environments that nurture their social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. It's about going beyond just the schools and the homes, creating this culture of support that permeates the entire community.
It really does take a village, doesn't it?
It does, and it involves everyone: community leaders, businesses, faith-based organizations, agencies that serve youth, and just regular citizens.
So what are some specific examples of what communities can do?
Well, they can provide access to high-quality early childhood education, and they can invest in things like after-school programs and summer programs, create safe, welcoming public spaces, support families with things like parenting classes, affordable childcare, and mental health services. And of course, they can promote youth development programs.
Those are great examples.
Yeah, and it's not just about providing services, it's about creating that culture of care and connection, where neighbors look out for each other and businesses support their local schools, and everyone feels responsible for all of the children in the community.
I love that. Dr. Knoff posed this really interesting question. Why is anyone surprised that the science and practice of teaching students social, emotional, and behavioral skills is any less sophisticated than teaching students literacy skills? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that question gets to the heart of why social emotional learning should be given the same importance as academics. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's about recognizing that they're both essential for a child to be truly successful.
And there's a science to it, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about good intentions.
Right.
We have to use a data-driven approach, make sure we're teaching these skills in a way that's developmentally appropriate. culturally sensitive, just like with literacy.
Yeah.
It takes time and effort and expertise to do this effectively. We can't just expect kids to absorb it through osmosis.
We have to teach them.
We do.
And that means investing in professional development, providing teachers with the resources and the support they need.
Right.
And this isn't just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that needs to be integrated into everything we do, at school, at home.
I agree. It's a lifelong journey.
Now, we've been talking a lot about teaching kids these skills, but what about the adults in their lives? Don't we need to be modeling these skills ourselves?
Of course we do. We can't expect kids to learn something that we're not willing to practice ourselves. It's not just about what we say, it's about what we do.
Lead by example.
Exactly. Kids are always watching us. They're always listening. They learn from our actions, our words, our attitudes. If we want them to be kind and respectful and responsible, well, then we need to be those things ourselves.
Walk the walk, talk the talk.
Exactly. And, it's okay to be honest with them about our own struggles. We don't have to be perfect, but we do have to be authentic. It's okay to admit when we're stressed out or frustrated. It can actually be really helpful for kids to see that even adults struggle with their emotions sometimes.
Yeah, it makes them feel less alone. Like it's okay to not be okay.
Exactly. It normalizes the human experience. It helps them understand that it's normal to have a range of emotions and that we all have to find healthy ways to cope with them. And it also gives us a chance to model those healthy coping mechanisms for them. Like if we want kids to learn how to manage their stress or their anger, we need to show them how we do it.
So it's about being a role model, showing them how to navigate those difficult emotions without losing control.
Precisely. And let's not forget about apologizing when we make mistakes. We're human, we all mess up sometimes, but it's so important to own up to those mistakes, apologize for any harm we might have caused, and try to make things right.
That's such a good point. It's about modeling accountability,
Yeah.
humility, showing them that it's okay to admit when we're wrong and try to do better next time.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's about creating a culture of respect and kindness, both at home and in our communities. If we want our kids to treat others with respect, we have to treat them with respect. If we want them to be kind, then we have to be kind.
It's about creating that ripple effect, spreading positivity and compassion.
You got it. And we have to remember, we're all in this together. We all have a role to play in creating a world where children feel safe, loved, and supported.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about how social-emotional learning benefits individual students, but what about the impact on the school as a whole? How can this focus benefit the entire school community?
It really does. It helps them to see that it's normal to have these ups and downs, all these different emotions, and that we all need to find healthy ways to deal with them.
Right.
And it gives us a chance to model those healthy ways of coping. Like if we want kids to learn to manage their anger or their stress, we need to show them how we do it.
So we're not just telling them what to do, we're showing them.
Exactly. And, we can't forget about apologizing when we mess up. We're all human. We make mistakes.
Right.
But it's important to own up to them. Apologize for any harm we've caused and try to make things right.
It's about teaching them accountability.
Yes.
And showing them that it's okay to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's about creating that culture of respect and kindness at home, in our communities. If we want our kids to treat others with respect, well, we have to treat them with respect.
Lead by example.
Exactly. And remember, we're all in this together. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about the ways social-emotional learning helps individual students. But what about the impact on the entire school? How does this focus benefit the whole school community?
Well, all the research points to the same conclusion. When schools make social-emotional learning a priority, everyone benefits.
Interesting.
It's not just about individual kids. It's about building a positive and supportive environment for everyone.
So it's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
That's a great way to put it. When students feel safe and respected, connected to their school, they're more engaged, they behave better, and they do better academically.
That makes sense.
And it creates this positive feedback loop. The more positive the school environment is, the better students do. And the better students do, the more positive the environment becomes.
It's like a win-win situation for everyone.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it's not just about academics either.
Right.
It has a positive impact on mental health, relationships with peers and adults, overall well-being.
So we're talking about creating a school culture where everyone feels valued, supported.
Exactly. Like they can succeed.
But how do we measure if these SEL programs are actually working? What are some signs to look for?
That's a great question. And researchers and educators are still figuring out the best ways to measure this. There's no one perfect way to do it, but there are some things we can look at.
Okay, so what are some of those signs?
One is academic improvement. We've talked about how social emotional learning is tied to academic success. So if we're seeing students improving their grades, doing better on tests, that's a good sign.
Makes sense. What else?
Another one is a decrease in behavior problems. When students learn to manage their emotions, resolve conflicts peacefully, make responsible choices, well, we tend to see less disruptive behavior, less bullying, and fewer disciplinary issues.
Okay, so what about the overall vibe of the school? How do we know if that's getting better?
Well, we can use things like surveys and observations and other data to measure school climate, how students and teachers feel about the environment. Do students feel safe, respected, connected? Do teachers feel supported and valued?
So it's not just about looking at numbers, it's about paying attention to how people feel.
Yes, exactly. And we also look for signs of increased student engagement. When students feel motivated and supported, they're more likely to be actively involved in their learning. Things like attendance rates, how much they participate in class, if they're completing their assignments.
Those are all good signs.
They are. And then there's mental health. These programs can help students learn coping skills for stress, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. And that can lead to improvements in their overall emotional well-being.
And hopefully prevent some of those more serious issues down the road.
Exactly. Things like self-harm, substance abuse, risky behaviors, we want to see those things going down.
Right. It's so important to track these outcomes to make sure that these SEL programs are actually making a difference.
I agree. And remember, these changes don't happen overnight. Social emotional learning, it's a long-term investment. It takes time, effort, consistency to see real, lasting results.
So we have to be patient.
We do. We can't get discouraged if we don't see changes right away. And it's also important to celebrate the small victories.
Right. Every step in the right direction.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation. We've really gone deep on this topic, explored the challenges, the opportunities, the potential of social emotional learning. So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
The one thing I hope they remember is this. Social emotional learning isn't just a nice extra. It's essential. It's absolutely crucial for kids to be successful in school, in their relationships, in life. And it's something that we all have a responsibility to support. Parents, educators, community members, everyone.
We all have a role to play.
Yes, we do. It's about working together to create a world where all children feel safe, loved, and empowered. A world where they can truly thrive.
I love that. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this part of our deep dive. But don't go anywhere just yet. We'll be right back with more insights and reflections. Welcome back to our deep dive on social emotional learning. We've been talking about the incredible impact it can have on a whole school community. But I'm wondering, how do we make sure it's not just a program, but part of the culture of a school?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? It can't be just another thing on the to-do list. It has to be woven into, everything the school does.
Right, so not just an SEL class once a week.
Exactly. It's about making it a part of the whole school day. From how teachers talk to students to how conflicts are resolved, everything.
So, everyone from the principal down to the cafeteria workers needs to be on board with this.
Yes, it has to be reflected in the school's policies and procedures, how they do things day to day.
Okay, so what would that look like in real life?
Well, one example is how they deal with conflict. Instead of just handing out punishments like suspensions, schools that are really focused on SEL might use something called restorative practices.
Restorative practices, what's that?
It's about repairing the harm that was done, and building relationships instead of just punishing. They bring together the people involved in a conflict and they talk about what happened, how it made everyone feel, and what they can do to make things right.
Wow, so it's like a conversation.
Yeah, it's about giving students a voice, helping them understand how their actions affect others. It's about making them part of the solution.
That's really different from how we usually think about discipline, isn't it?
It is, but there's actually a lot of research that shows it can be really effective in reducing bullying and improving the whole school climate. It helps build a sense of community.
It sounds like this can really change the way the school feels.
It can. And it's not just about discipline either. It's also about how teachers talk to their students, how they set up their classrooms, how they teach.
So give me an example. How can a teacher actually work social emotional learning into their everyday lessons?
Well, start the day with a morning meeting. a time for kids to connect with each other, talk about how they're feeling, set goals for the day, give them chances to work together on projects, where they have to support each other and learn from each other. And you can even find ways to tie SEL into the actual content you're teaching.
Okay, but how do you do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you teach social emotional skills while you're also teaching, say, math or history?
Just be creative. Look for the connections. Like if you're teaching a history lesson about the civil rights movement, you can talk about empathy and courage, stand up for what's right. Or if you're teaching science, a lesson about ecosystems, you can talk about cooperation and interdependence.
Oh, I see. It's about making those connections and showing them how these skills are relevant to everything they learn.
Exactly. And it's not just what you teach, it's how you teach it. The whole classroom environment matters.
So what can teachers do to create an environment that supports this kind of learning?
Well, creating that feeling of belonging is important. Greeting students at the door, using their names, getting to know them. Give them a chance to share their thoughts and feelings and know that they'll be heard.
So it's about relationships, right?
Yes. When kids feel connected to their teachers and their classmates, they do so much better.
Now, what about discipline? How can teachers handle behavior problems in a way that's in line with all of this?
Focus on preventing problems before they happen. Set clear expectations. Have routines. Teach kids the skills they need to manage their own behavior.
Be proactive.
Yes. And when problems do come up, stay calm, be consistent, be respectful.
And remember, we talked about this earlier, it's about seeing behavior as communication.
Yes. Yes. Instead of thinking a kid is just trying to be difficult, ask yourself, what are they trying to tell me? What do they need?
I love that. We've covered a lot of ground today. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
Social emotional learning isn't just some trendy new thing. It's fundamental to how kids develop. It's essential for their success in every aspect of life.
And we all have a part to play in making sure they get what they need.
We do. We need to work together to create a world where all kids feel safe and loved and like they can achieve anything.
So well said. And it makes me think about what Dr. Knoff said. If teaching appropriate behavior is just as important as teaching kids to read, why aren't we giving it the same attention and resources? That's something we should all be asking ourselves. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into social emotional learning. I hope you learned as much as I did.